In the unforgiving frontier town of Ash Hollow, where whispers carry the weight of stones, Clara Wynne bears the scarlet letter of widowhood with quiet dignity. Blamed for her husband's mysterious death, she endures daily torment from townsfolk, who mask their cruelty behind false virtue. Her bruises tell a story of persecution, her silence a testament to survival. But someone is watching. Bo Callahan, the wealthiest rancher for 100 miles, sees what others choose to ignore. Known for his lethal aim and iron will, he's a man who speaks rarely, but whose words reshape destinies. When Clara suffers another public assault, Bo makes a declaration that stuns the town. She is to be his bride. What drives a man of such power to risk everything for a woman branded by scandal? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn crept through the worn lace curtains of Clara Wynne's modest home on the outskirts of Ash Hollow, painting shadows across her weathered kitchen table. Her fingers absently twisted the tarnished gold band on her left hand, a habit born of anxiety rather than remembrance. The ring that once symbolized love now served as a beacon for scorn, drawing suspicious glances and whispered accusations wherever she went. The morning ritual began as it always did: rise before the sun, tend to her small garden while the streets were empty, and prepare for another day of calculated avoidance. She'd learned to time her movements like a smuggler in her own town, slipping between buildings, taking back alleys, and keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Clara caught her reflection in the washbasin's rippling surface. At 32, grief had etched subtle lines around her eyes, but hadn't dimmed their determined glint. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, every strand controlled, as if perfect propriety might somehow shield her from the town's judgment. They called her Widow Wynne now, spitting the words like curse. The memories of that stormy night 6 months ago rose unbidden. Thomas, drunk again, stumbling through the door, raging about lost wages and bad luck, the crack of lightning that illuminated his twisted face as he raised his fist, the thunder that swallowed her scream, then silence, deep and final, as he clutched his chest and collapsed. The doctor called it heart failure, but the town had other theories. Witchcraft, they whispered. Poison, they muttered. Justice, she sometimes thought in her darkest moments, though guilt immediately followed such thoughts. A sharp rap at her door startled her from her reverie. Through the window, she glimpsed Mrs. Beaumont's elaborate hat, adorned with feathers that seemed to quiver with self-righteous indignation. The woman was Ash Hollow's self-appointed moral guardian, and she'd made Clara her personal crusade. Mrs. Wynne, the older woman's voice dripped with false concern, the Ladies' Aid Society is meeting this afternoon. We've been discussing your situation. Your soul's welfare is of great concern to us all. Clara's hand tightened on the door frame. Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont, but I have pressing matters to attend to. Indeed. Mrs. Beaumont's painted lips curved in a cruel smile. More important than your reputation, than your salvation. There are rumors, Mrs. Wynne, disturbing rumors about that night. A God-fearing woman would want to clear her name. The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. Clara had seen others, broken by Mrs. Beaumont's particular brand of Christian charity. Their businesses ruined, their children ostracized, their lives dismantled piece by piece until they fled town or bent to her will. Good day, Mrs. Beaumont. Clara closed the door firmly, then pressed her forehead against the worn wood, listening to the angry rustle of skirts retreating down her front steps. Through her kitchen window she could see the distant expanse of the Callahan Ranch, a kingdom unto itself sprawling across the horizon. Its owner was as much myth as man to most of Ash Hollow's residents, a shadow that passed through town on horseback, conducting business with a nod rather than words. Clara had never spoken to him, but sometimes she felt his presence like a weight, as if those distant hills held watching eyes. She touched her wedding ring once more, then squared her shoulders. Another day in Ash Hollow began, and she had supplies to purchase, whether the town wanted her there or not. She'd survived. Thomas's fists, she would survive their stones as well, even if they wore away at her, one small cruelty at a time. Beau Callahan lowered his brass spyglass, its well-worn surface reflecting the morning light. From his vantage point atop Morgan's Ridge, Ash Hollow spread below like a weathered chessboard, its pieces moving in predictable patterns of malice and manipulation. The instrument had been his father's, a relic from a sailing life abandoned for the promise of Western prosperity, and now served a different kind of navigation. He'd watched the town's cruel ritual unfold again. Clara wins. Solitary figure moving between shadows, the strategic parting of crowds, the performative turning of backs. Even from this distance, he recognized the rigid set of her shoulders, the careful measurement of each step. A woman walking through fire, determined not to show burns. His bay stallion, Thunder, shifted restlessly beneath him. At 45, Beau sat his horse with the same quiet authority that marked everything he did. Time had carved deep lines around his eyes and silver threads through his dark hair, but age had only refined the intensity of his gaze. The townspeople called him the Ghost Rider when they thought he couldn't hear, the wealthy spectre who haunted their borders, more legend than man. Easy now, he murmured to Thunder, though the horse wasn't the one needing steadying. His fingers tightened around the spyglass as he watched Mrs. Beaumont's morning assault on Clara's door. The scene played out in silent pantomime, but he'd witnessed enough of the woman's righteous cruelty over the years to fill in the words. 20 years of self-imposed solitude had taught Beau the value of watching. He'd built his empire on observation, knowing when to buy, when to sell, when to speak, and when silence carried more weight than words. The town both feared and needed him. His ranch employed half their men, his contracts kept their businesses afloat, and his mere presence deterred the sort of trouble that plagued other frontier towns. But he'd never involved himself in their social affairs, not since Sarah. The memory of his first wife still ached like an old bullet wound, the way the town had whispered about her, too. A Boston girl, too refined for frontier life, they'd said. When fever took her and their unborn child, the whispers turned to judgment. Should have married local stock, they clucked. Should have known better than to bring Eastern delicacy to Western. Hardship. He'd withdrawn then, letting the legend grow while the man retreated. His ranch became his fortress, work his shelter, silence his armor. Until Clara Wynne arrived in Ash Hollow, and something in her quiet dignity had cracked his carefully constructed walls. Through the spyglass, he watched her emerge from her house, market basket in hand. Even from here, he could see the deliberate grace in her movements. A woman who had learned to wear persecution like a second skin. She reminded him of the wild horses he gentled, proud creatures made wary by rough handling, but still possessing an untamed spirit in their eyes. His foreman, Jake Martinez, rode up beside him. 20 years of loyalty had earned the man the right to speak freely. "Watching the widow again, boss?" Beau lowered the spyglass, but didn't answer. Jake sighed, the sound heavy with concern. "Town's getting worse. Heard talk at the saloon last night. They're saying she's cursed, saying anyone who helps her'll share in it." Jake paused, choosing his next words carefully. Also heard Beaumont's bunch is pressuring Miller to call in her mortgage. The brass of the spyglass creaked under Beau's tightening grip. He'd known Thomas Wynne, a mean drunk who'd squandered his wife's inheritance on cards and whiskey. The man's death had been no mystery to those who understood the wages of excess, but Ash Hollow preferred darker explanations. "Ain't right," Jake continued. "What they're doing to her reminds me of Sarah." Beau finished quietly. Yes. Below, Clara had reached the market square. Through the spyglass, Beau watched the familiar choreography of cruelty. The sudden emptying of space around her, the performative gathering of skirts, the mothers pulling children away as if widowhood were contagious. Yet she moved through it, all with a grace that made their actions seem small and petty in comparison. Sometimes, Bo said, his voice rough from disuse, a town needs reminding of its conscience. Jake straightened in his saddle, recognizing the shift in his boss's tone. What are you thinking? But Bo had already turned Thunder toward town, the spyglass tucked safely in his saddlebag. He'd watched long enough. Sarah's memory had taught him the price of silence, and he'd carried that guilt for 20 years. Some debts could only be paid in action. Behind him, Jake allowed himself a small smile. The Ghost Rider was about to become flesh and blood again, and Ash Hollow's comfortable cruelty was about to meet its reckoning. The market square baked under the late morning sun, dust devils dancing between the stalls like restless spirits. Clara gripped her basket tighter, its worn handles smooth from anxiety's familiar touch. She had timed her shopping for when the square was busiest, a counterintuitive choice, but experience had taught her that public cruelty required a certain intimacy her tormentors were reluctant to risk in a crowd. Today, however, something felt different. The usual bubble of emptiness around her had grown denser, more deliberate. Mrs. Beaumont stood by the dry goods store, holding court among her followers, her voice carrying just loud enough to wound. And then poor Thomas, crying out in such agony. Suspicious, isn't it? A man that strong, dying so suddenly. A dramatic pause. Of course, some poisons leave no trace. Clara's hand trembled as she selected vegetables from Mr. Peterson's stand. The old farmer avoided her eyes as he took her coins, dropping them as if they burned his fingers. Her basket was half full when she heard the sharp crack of wood against cobblestone. Someone had stuck out a walking stick, sending Mrs. Miller sprawling. "Oh, the witch made me trip." Mrs. Miller's accusation rang across the square. "Did you see? She used her evil eye." Clara hadn't been within 10 feet of the woman, but truth had long since ceased to matter in Ash Hollow's persecution of the widow Wynne. "I saw it too," another voice joined in. "She muttered something under her breath." The crowd contracted around her like a noose. Clara clutched her basket closer, searching for an escape route, but finding only a wall of hostile faces. Mrs. Beaumont pushed to the front, righteous fury amplified by her morning's failure to intimidate Clara at her home. "It's time we stopped tolerating this evil in our midst," Mrs. Beaumont declared. "Think of our children, our souls." She turned to Clara, voice dripping false concern. "Confess, Mrs. Wynne. Cleanse your soul before God. Tell us how you murdered your husband." "I did not murder Thomas." Clara's voice was quiet but clear, carrying across the sudden hush. "God knows the truth." "Blasphemy!" Mrs. Beaumont's hand shot out, knocking the basket from Clara's grip. Vegetables rolled across the dusty ground as someone shoved Clara from behind. She stumbled, catching herself against a post, feeling the scratch of splintered wood against her palms. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Mrs. Beaumont intoned, reaching for Clara's arm with talon-like fingers. "Perhaps a ducking in the horse trough will loosen your tongue." The crack of a rifle shot split the air. The crowd froze, then parted like water before fire as hoofbeats approached. Clara turned to see a massive bay stallion entering the square, its rider a dark silhouette against the morning sun. The rifle in his hands wasn't aimed at anyone, but its recent discharge left a thread of smoke curling skyward like an admonishing finger. Bo Callahan dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs ringing against the cobblestones with each deliberate step. The legend made flesh, no longer a distant shadow, but a force that seemed to draw all light and air from the space around him. His eyes, grey as storm clouds, surveyed the scene with cold precision. Mrs. Beaumont recovered first, smoothing her skirts. "Mr. Callahan, how fortunate! We were just dealing with a matter of public safety. I saw." His voice was deep, rough from disuse, yet it carried effortlessly. "I saw everything." Those 3 words fell like stones into the square's silence. His gaze swept the crowd, lingering on faces, memorizing them. These people who owed their livelihood to his contracts, his employment, his business, now shrinking from his judgment. Clara stood very still as he approached her. His movements, measured, almost gentle, like a man approaching a spooked horse. He knelt, gathering her scattered vegetables with calloused hands, placing them one by one back into the basket. The town watched, transfixed by the sight of Ash Hollow's wealthiest citizen performing such a menial task. When he finished, he straightened, holding her basket in one hand and his rifle in the other. His eyes met Clara's for the first time, and she saw something there that stole her breath, not pity but recognition. The look of one survivor seeing their own wounds reflected in another. "Mrs. Wynne," he said, his voice pitched for her alone, though the entire square strained to hear. "I believe we have matters to discuss." The broken basket in his hands marked the moment everything changed, the instant when persecution met protection, and a widow's silence found its answer in a watchman's words. Sheriff Marcus Webb's office had never felt smaller than it did in this moment, the afternoon sun casting prison bar shadows through the window. His quill scratched against the marriage registry with deliberate slowness, each stroke an attempt to delay the inevitable. Across his desk, Bo Callahan stood like a storm front, his presence filling the room with charged anticipation. "You understand what you're doing, Bo?" Marcus asked, looking up from the ledger. 20 years of friendship earned him the right to question. "This isn't like buying a new parcel of land." "Write it down, Marcus." Bo's voice carried the same quiet authority that had silenced the market square an hour earlier. Clara stood slightly apart, her market basket still clutched. In white-knuckled hands, the vegetables inside now crushed from the morning's violence. Her mind raced back through the events that had led to this moment, each scene more surreal than the last. After helping her gather her scattered dignity along with her vegetables, Bo had turned to address the crowd. His words still rang in her ears. "Mrs. Wynne has endured enough of Ash Hollow's particular brand of justice. From this day forward, she's under my protection as my wife." The shocked silence that followed had been absolute, broken only by Mrs. Beaumont's theatrical gasp and the sound of Jake Martinez's quiet chuckle from atop his horse. Now, watching the sheriff's pen move across the page, Clara felt suspended between terror and hope. Bo hadn't asked her, not really. But he had looked at her with those storm-grey eyes and said, "Unless you object, Mrs. Wynne." And in that moment, she'd seen a path out of her personal hell. "It ain't natural." Mrs. Beaumont's voice carried through the open window from where a crowd had gathered outside. "A man like him marrying a—" The scratch of the sheriff's pen paused. "That woman's like to cause trouble," Marcus warned. "She already has." Bo's hand rested on the butt of his holstered pistol, a casual reminder of his reputation. "This ends it." Clara finally found her voice. "Mr. Callahan, I don't expect anything. Once the papers are signed, I can stay in my house. You needn't trouble yourself further." Bo turned to her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Your house has a mortgage coming due. Miller's been pressured to call it in." His voice gentled. "The ranch has room." Of course he knew about the mortgage. The Ghost Rider saw everything from his hillside perch. Clara wondered what else he'd witnessed during her months of torment and why he'd chosen this moment to intervene. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Need your signatures, both of you." He turned the ledger, its pages heavy with the weight of history. How many other marriages had been recorded here? How many born of love rather than necessity? Clara stepped forward, taking the offered pen. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name, the ink marking her transition from Widow Wynne to Mrs. Callahan. Bo's signature followed, his strong strokes a stark contrast to her delicate script. "Witnessed and recorded," Marcus declared, pressing his official seal into the hot wax. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you man and wife." He looked between them awkwardly. "I reckon you can kiss if you've a mind to." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Bo simply offered his arm with old-world courtesy. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, her new name a question and an answer both. "Shall we?" Outside, the crowd parted before them like waters before Moses. Clara felt their stares like physical blows, heard the whispers already starting. But now those whispers held a different tenor, fear of Beau Callahan outweighing their hatred of her. Mrs. Beaumont stood directly in their path, her face mottled with suppressed rage. "The Lord sees all, Mr. Callahan, even those who harbor—" "Yes," Beau cut her off, his voice carrying across the street. "He does see all, every stone thrown, every lie whispered, every false accusation." His grip on Clara's arm tightened protectively. "Remember that, Mrs. Beaumont." Thunder, his bay stallion, waited patiently beside Jake's horse. With surprising gentleness, Beau helped Clara mount behind him. The broken market basket, now a symbol of her old life, remained on the sheriff's porch. As they rode out of town, Clara fighting vertigo from the unfamiliar height, she heard Jake's amused drawl, "Reckon Ash Hollow just got themselves a new first lady." The marriage registry on the sheriff's desk lay open, ink still drying on their names. One chapter of Clara's life closed, another beginning, written in iron and law, sealed with a desperate hope, and witnessed by a town that would soon learn the true meaning of Beau Callahan's protection. The iron gates of the Callahan Ranch rose before them like the entrance to another world, their elaborate scrollwork spelling out CC Ranch in curves that caught the late afternoon light. Clara felt the shift in Beau's posture as they passed. Beneath them, a subtle relaxing of shoulders that spoke of home ground and lifted burden. The ranch spread out before her like something from a dime novel's pages, a sprawling two-story main house built of rich red timber and local stone, flanked by well-maintained outbuildings, corrals, and a massive barn. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the wild calling of horses. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," Jake called out as he rode ahead to alert the house staff. The words felt foreign in Clara's ears, like a language she'd yet to learn. Beau guided Thunder toward the house with practiced ease. Clara, still pressed, against his back caught the scent of leather and prairie sage, noting how his posture remained carefully proper despite their proximity. A marriage of convenience, then, a shield, not a shackle. The knowledge brought both relief and an unexpected twinge of something else. The housekeeper waited on the broad porch, a tall woman with iron-grey hair and watchful eyes. "I'm Mrs. Hayes," she said, as Beau helped Clara dismount. "We've prepared the East Wing guest room," a pointed look at Beau. "Unless you'd prefer different arrangements?" "The guest room will do fine," Beau replied, his tone brooking no discussion. To Clara he added, "Mrs. Hayes runs this house better than any general. She'll show you what you need to know." Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This was to be a marriage in name only, their spaces as separate as their pasts. She followed Mrs. Hayes into the house, feeling Beau's presence fall away like a shadow at noon. The interior spoke of restrained wealth, quality furnishings chosen for comfort rather than show, walls adorned with scenes of Western life, floors covered in thick rugs that muffled their footsteps. But it was the library they passed that caught Clara's eye. Walls of books reaching to the ceiling, leather chairs worn to inviting softness, a desk scattered with papers bearing Beau's bold handwriting. "The master's sanctuary," Mrs. Hayes explained, catching her look. "Though you'll find him more often in the stables than the study these days." They climbed the broad staircase to the east wing. Clara's room was larger than her entire former house, with windows overlooking the corrals and distant pastures. A new trunk stood at the foot of the bed. "Your things from town," Mrs. Hayes explained. "Jake rode back for them while you were at the sheriff's. Thought you might sleep easier with familiar items around you." She paused. "The master, he's a good man, Mrs. Callahan. Better than most know." "I don't want to disrupt your household," Clara said carefully, "or Mr. Callahan's life." Mrs. Hayes's expression softened slightly. "Child, his life could use some disrupting. Been too quiet here since Sarah passed." She moved to the window, adjusting curtains that needed no adjustment. 20 years he's let that ghost haunt him. Maybe it's time for some living to happen in these halls again. The mention of Sarah hung in the air like smoke. Clara had heard whispers about Beau's first wife, but like most Ash Hollow gossip, she'd learned to distrust them. Suppers at 6, Mrs. Hayes continued briskly. "The master takes his in the small dining room, not the formal one. He's particular about punctuality." She headed for the door, then turned back. "And Mrs. Callahan, whatever brought you here? You're under this roof now. That means something in this house." Left alone, Clara sank onto the bed's edge, its softness foreign after years of her thin mattress. Through the window, she watched Bo in the corral below, working with a spirited young horse. His movements were patient, assured, showing the same gentle strength he'd displayed in the market square. Marriage of convenience, yes. But as she unpacked her meager belongings, Clara felt something unfamiliar take root in her chest. Hope, fragile as a prairie flower after drought. The iron gates had marked more than a boundary between ranch and town. They'd marked a line between past and future, persecution and protection. From below came the sound of hoofbeats and Bo's quiet voice, gentling the nervous horse. Clara touched the cool glass of her window, watching. She'd learned to survive in Ash Hollow's shadows. Perhaps, here, in this strange new world of iron gates and quiet strength, she might learn to live again. Dawn painted the ranch in shades of pearl and promise, drawing Clara from her too-soft bed to the window. Below, ranch hands moved through their morning routines like a well-rehearsed dance. In the nearest corral, a magnificent black mare paced, restlessly tossing her head at anyone who approached. Around her neck hung a worn leather bridle, its brass fittings dulled with age. "That's midnight," Bo's voice came from her doorway, making her start. He stood with careful formality in the hall, already dressed for the day. "Sorry to disturb you. Mrs. Hayes mentioned you were early to rise." "The mare," Clara said, drawing her shawl closer. "She seems troubled. Wild caught 2 weeks ago. Won't let anyone near her." A pause. "Would you like to meet her?" The invitation surprised her. Since their arrival yesterday, Bo had maintained a respectful distance, their paths crossing only at the quiet supper where conversation stayed safely tethered to ranch business. In the early morning light, the stable's interior glowed like polished honey. Clara inhaled deeply. Hay, leather, horse, and beneath it all the sharp, clean scent of sage that seemed to follow Bo everywhere. He moved through the space with fluid familiarity, greeting each horse by name. "My father believed horses could read souls," he said, leading her to Midnight's stall. "Said they knew truth from lies better than any man." He reached for a curry brush, offering it to Clara. "Care to test his theory?" Clara accepted the brush, its handle smooth from years of use. "My grandfather raised horses before the fever. Took him. He taught me their ways when I was small." The memory warmed her voice. "Mother said it wasn't ladylike, but Papa encouraged it." Bo's expression shifted subtly. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Approach her slowly," he instructed. "Let her know your intentions." Clara moved toward the stall, keeping her movements fluid and calm. Midnight's ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring as she assessed this new human. The mare's eyes held a familiar wariness, the look of a creature who'd learned to expect harm from the world. "I know, sweet girl," Clara murmured. "The world's not always kind to wild things, is it?" She extended her hand, palm up, offering choice rather than demand. Midnight stretched her neck, breath warm against Clara's fingers. Then, to the watching ranch hand's amazement, the mare stepped forward, allowing Clara to stroke her sleek neck. "Well now," Jake's voice came from behind them, rich with amusement. "Reckon we just found our new horse whisperer." Bo watched Clara work, her gentle hands smoothing Midnight's coat as she spoke in low, soothing tones. The mare gradually relaxed, the tension flowing out of her powerful frame like water. She just needed someone who understood, Clara said softly, working a knot from the mare's mane. "Sometimes fear looks like fury. Sometimes survival means fighting. Everything that comes near." The words hung in the morning air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Bo's hands tightened on the stall door. "Yes," he said roughly, "sometimes it does." Clara's fingers found the old bridle, its leather cracked but still sturdy. This seemed special. It was Sarah's. The words came slowly, as if drawn from a deep well. She loved riding. Had a way with horses like you. He touched the bridle's weathered surface. Midnight's the first horse that's shown interest in it since... He didn't finish, but Clara understood. The bridle was more than tack. It was memory made tangible, a bridge between past and present. Tell me about her? Clara asked gently, continuing to brush Midnight's coat. If you'd like to. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then she laughed easily, loved books, wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. His voice grew distant. Town never understood her. She was too different, too educated, He trailed off. Too much herself, Clara supplied quietly. Beau's eyes met hers, sharp with sudden understanding. Yes. They worked together in comfortable silence, Clara brushing while Beau mucked the stall. Midnight accepted their presence like she'd known them always, occasionally. Nudging Clara's shoulder with her velvet nose, "You'll need a horse of your own," Beau said finally, straightening. "For ranch business. If you'd like her, she's yours." Clara's hand stilled on Midnight's neck. "Are you sure? She's chosen you already." He managed a slight smile. Besides, Father was right. Horses know. He hesitated, then added, "The bridle, too, if you want it. Sarah would have liked that, knowing it was being used by someone who understands." The offering wasn't just leather and brass, Clara knew. It was trust, acceptance, perhaps even the first thread of healing. She touched the bridle gently, feeling its history beneath her fingers. "I'd be honored," she said simply. Above them, morning light streamed through the stable's high windows, turning dust motes to floating gold. In her stall, Midnight nickered softly, wild heart learning to trust again. Like others around her, the letter arrived with the weekly supply wagon, innocent-looking among bills of sale and business correspondence. Clara found it while sorting the mail at Beau's desk, a task she'd quietly assumed after noticing his tendency to let paperwork pile up. The envelope bore no return address, only the name Callahan written in an elaborate hand she recognized all too well. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it, the paper expensive and heavy, the kind Mrs. Beaumont used for her church. Announcements? For a moment she considered burning it unopened, but secrets had a way of festering, and she'd had enough of those to last a lifetime. "Dear Mr. Callahan," the letter began, its poisoned courtesy dripping from every careful stroke. "As upstanding members of this God-fearing community, we feel compelled to warn you of the grave danger you've welcomed into your home. Your noble intentions toward the widow Wynne, while admirable, have blinded you to certain facts." The words that followed were carefully crafted daggers, each one honed to draw blood. Whispers about Thomas's death, implications about Clara's, unnatural influence over men, veiled suggestions about her midnight activities. The letter concluded with a threat wrapped in concern. "Consider how your business interests might suffer should your judgment be called into question. After all, who would trust a man bewitched? Mrs. Hayes said you'd be in here." Beau's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his expression shifting as he read her face. "What's wrong?" Clara tried to hide the letter, but he crossed the room in 3 long strides, gently taking it from her trembling hands. She watched his face as he read, seeing the storm gather in his eyes. "They've been leaving packages, too," she admitted quietly. "Dead flowers, chicken bones. Witch warning signs from the old country?" She swallowed hard. "I've been gathering them before the hands can see." Beau's hands tightened on the paper until it crackled. "How long?" "Since the wedding. I didn't want to trouble you. You've already done so much." "Clara," his voice was rough, "you're my wife, legally and in the eyes of God and man. Their attacks on you are attacks on this house." He looked down at the letter again. "I recognize this paper. Beaumont. She leads them, but she's not alone. Miller's stopped extending credit to your ranch hands in town. Peterson won't sell vegetables to your cook. They're trying to isolate us, he repeated softly, noting her choice of words. Clara straightened her spine. I won't be the cause of harm to your business, Mr. Callahan. Perhaps if I were to leave quietly— No. The word cracked like a whip. Bo crossed to the window, staring out at the ranch that 3 generations of Callahans had built. 20 years ago, I let them whisper Sarah to death, stood aside thinking dignity meant silence, thinking if we just ignored them. His voice roughened. Never again. He turned back to her, and Clara saw something fierce wake in his face. The ghost. Becoming flesh, the silence finding its voice. This is your home now, your ranch, your life to live as you choose. He held up the letter, and I aim to make that clear to every God-fearing soul in Ash Hollow. They'll fight back harder, she warned. Let them. A dangerous smile touched his lips. I own the banknotes on half their businesses, control the water rights they depend on. They've forgotten that while they were spreading gossip, I was building power. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she felt the solid strength of his presence. You're not alone anymore, Clara. The afternoon sun slanted through the study windows, catching the letter's elaborate script. Such a delicate thing to carry so much malice. But paper burned and ink faded, and perhaps Mrs. Beaumont had forgotten that not all wealthy men were. Made weak by comfort. What will you do? Clara asked. Remind them why they feared me before they feared you. He took the letter to his desk, laying it flat. But first, we're going to respond. Together. Let them see that a Callahan household stands united. Clara watched him pull out fresh paper and ink, seeing not the quiet widower she'd married, but something altogether more formidable. The Ghost Rider was awakening, and Ash Hollow would soon remember why legends were born of fear as much as respect. The anonymous letter lay between them like a declaration of war, but this time Clara faced the battle with solid ground beneath her feet and an ally at her side. Let them whisper. Let them scheme. The wind that carried their threats would soon bear witness to their fall. The lightning-struck oak stood sentinel at the edge of the north pasture, its scarred trunk a testament to nature's fury. Clara watched anxious clouds gather above it, painting the afternoon sky the color of fresh bruises. Behind her, the ranch. Hands worked with urgent efficiency, securing buildings and livestock against the coming storm. Biggest system I've seen in years, Jake said, joining her at the fence. Barometers dropping like a stone. He cast a worried glance toward the distant herd. Bo rode out an hour ago to help bring in the strays. Should have been back by now. Thunder growled across the hills like a hungry beast. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of rain and something else. Fear. Clara felt it in the restless shifting of the horses. Saw it in the nervous glances the hands exchanged. This wasn't just weather, this was Judgment Day bearing down on them. Midnight's the strongest mount we have, Clara said, decision crystallizing. I'm going to find him. Jake grabbed her arm. Mrs. Callahan, begging your pardon, but the master would skin me alive if I let you. You're not letting me do anything, Jake. She met his eyes steadily. I'm telling you what I'm doing. She pulled free, already moving toward the stable. Send up a flare if we're not back in an hour. Midnight seemed to understand the urgency, responding to Clara's every cue as they rode out. The mare's hooves flew over the increasingly treacherous ground, navigating through the growing darkness with sure-footed grace. Clara bent low over her neck, scanning the horizon for any sign of Bo. The first fat drops of rain struck like bullets. Within minutes, the world dissolved into sheets of water and howling wind. Lightning split the sky, and in its brief illumination, Clara caught a glimpse of something that stopped her heart. Thunder, Bo's stallion, riderless and wild-eyed, fighting his trailing reins. "Whoa, boy!" Clara called, guiding Midnight alongside him. The stallion knew her voice from their morning stable visits, allowing her to catch his dragging reins. The leather was torn, suggesting a fall rather than a clean break. Another lightning. Flash revealed tracks in the mud, leading toward the lightning-scarred oak. Clara's throat tightened as she remembered Thomas's final night. Another storm, another oak, another moment when nature's fury changed everything. She found Beau conscious but dazed, propped against the oak's massive trunk. Blood matted his hair, where he'd struck a low-hanging branch, but his eyes focused when they found her face. "Clara," he sounded confused, "you shouldn't be out here." "Neither should you," she replied, dismounting. "Can you stand?" Thunder spooked at the lightning. He winced as she helped him up. "Caught me off guard. Stupid mistake. Even legends are allowed mistakes." She smiled through her worry, steadying him. "Though perhaps next time check the weather before playing hero." The ghost of a laugh escaped him, then turned to a grimace. Clara's hands moved surely over his ribs, checking for breaks with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," he observed. "Thomas came home injured often enough." The words slipped out before she could catch them. In the storm's wild darkness, old truth seemed easier to speak. Usually his own doing. Drink makes men clumsy. Beau's hand caught hers, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "That night, the night he died, tell me." Clara stared into the rain, seeing another storm, another time. "He'd lost everything at cards. Again, came home raging, lightning in his eyes. Said he'd teach me to respect him properly this time." Her voice steadied. "But when he raised his fist, his heart finally showed more wisdom than he did. Paled him right there in our kitchen. You didn't kill him. No, God did that, or his own poison. But the town needed someone to blame, and a wife who didn't weep enough at his funeral made an easy target." She met Beau's eyes. "Why did you really marry me?" Thunder crashed overhead, but Beau's voice came clear through the storm. "Because I watched you walk through hell with your head high. Because you reminded me what courage looks like." His hand tightened on hers. "Because 20 years ago I was too much of a coward to stop them from destroying someone else. He broke off, swaying slightly. "We need to get you back," Clara said, helping him toward midnight. "This storm's not through with us yet." They rode double through the deluge, Clara's arms around Beau's waist to keep him steady. Neither spoke, but something had shifted between them, like the air after lightning strikes, charged with new possibility, clean of old fears. The lightning-struck oak disappeared into the storm behind them, its scarred branches reaching skyward, like fingers seeking absolution. Like the tree, they both bore marks of nature's fury. Like the tree, they still stood, damaged perhaps, but unbowed, finding strength in their very wounds. The library's peace wrapped around Clara like a familiar shawl as she organized Beau's scattered papers. After the storm, he'd finally agreed to let her help with the ranch's books, though his current laudanum-induced rest hadn't given him much choice in the matter. Dr. Morrison had been clear. The concussion needed time to heal. Her fingers traced the edge of his desk's bottom drawer, feeling the slight catch that suggested long disuse. Inside lay decades of carefully filed documents, each folder marked in Beau's precise hand. But it was a yellowed newspaper clipping, pressed between the pages of a ledger that caught her eye. "Tragedy strikes Callahan Ranch," the headline declared. "Prominent rancher's wife dies in mysterious circumstances." The date placed it 20 years ago, just months after Beau and Sarah's wedding. Clara's hands trembled as she read. The article painted a familiar picture, a refined Eastern woman, unsuited to frontier life. Rumors of strange beliefs, of books on natural medicine, of healing herbs grown in secret gardens. A sudden illness, whispers of self-administered poison, and beneath it all, the town's unmistakable judgment. "That's private." Beau's voice, rough with sleep and medicine, made her start. He stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. "You should be resting," Clara said, but didn't try to hide the clipping. After last night's truths shared in the storm, pretense seemed pointless. She wasn't who they said. He moved carefully to his chair, the lingering effects of his injury, evident in each deliberate step. Sarah was brilliant. Studied medicine back east, unofficially, of course. No college would admit a woman. His fingers traced the article's edge. She wanted to help people, used her knowledge of herbs, traditional, Remedies, called it kitchen medicine to make it seem harmless, but the town didn't see it that way. No, bitterness edged his voice. They called it witchcraft, said she was poisoning their wells, cursing their children. When the fever came, he stopped, the memory still raw after 2 decades. She tried to help, had medicines that might have saved lives, but they wouldn't let her near their sick, called her a harbinger of death instead of the healer she was. Clara saw it clearly now, the parallel that had drawn him to her case. Another woman condemned by ignorance, another, life twisted by lies. The fever took her in the end, Bo continued, along with our unborn child. But before that, the whispers, the isolation. I thought if we ignored it, if we stayed above it. His hand clenched on the desk. I failed her, Clara. Let her face their cruelty alone, because I thought dignity meant silence. You were young, Clara said softly. Sometimes survival teaches us the wrong lessons. I learned, he agreed grimly. Built my empire, made myself necessary to their survival, became the ghost they feared glimpsing on their borders. But I couldn't save her. So you saved me instead. Their eyes met across the desk. Perhaps, he admitted, we saved each other. Clara looked down at the article again, seeing Sarah's story with new clarity. A healer branded a witch, a woman. Of science condemned by superstition. Just as Clara's quiet dignity had been twisted into cold-heartedness, Sarah's knowledge had been transformed into something dark and threatening. She kept a journal, Bo said suddenly. Her medicines, her observations. I sealed it away after, but perhaps, he reached into the drawer, producing a leather-bound book. You should have this. You'd understand it better than I did. The journal's pages were filled with careful notes, detailed drawings of herbs, precise instructions for tinctures and poultices. Sarah's intelligence shone through every word, her compassion evident in margin notes about patients helped, lives touched. She would have liked you, Bo said quietly. You have the same strength, the same unwillingness to let their darkness dim your light. Clara closed the journal gently. Then we honor her by refusing to hide. By using what she knew to help others. She met his gaze steadily. And by remembering that dignity isn't silence, it's truth spoken in the face of lies. The newspaper clipping lay between them, its accusations faded by time, but its lesson clear. 20 years of guilt and grief had built walls around Bo's heart, but within those walls, he'd also built the power to prevent history from repeating itself. Together then, he said, and Clara heard the echo of a promise in those words. Together, she agreed and reached across the desk to take his hand. The town council meeting minutes lay open on the polished table of Ash Hollow's assembly hall, their formal script belying the venom beneath. Clara sat straight back beside Bo, feeling the weight of hostile stares from the gathered council. Members, Mrs. Beaumont occupied her usual seat of prominence, her elaborate hat unable to disguise the malice in her eyes. Item 4, Mayor Harrison read, his voice carrying artificial gravity. Discussion of recent disruptions to town commerce and social order brought by concerned citizens. He shuffled his papers. Mrs. Beaumont, you have the floor. Thank you. Mayor, Mrs. Beaumont rose, clutching a sheaf of papers. As duly appointed head of the Ladies' Aid Society and moral guardian of this God-fearing community, I must bring to the council's attention certain irregularities since Mr. Callahan's unfortunate marriage. Bo's hand found Clara's under the table, a quiet gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by their observers. Mrs. Beaumont's lips tightened. Businesses are suffering. Families are afraid. There are reports of strange lights at the ranch at night, odd smells from herb gardens, animals acting peculiar. She laid her papers on the table. And now we find that certain medicines are being distributed to our workers, remedies of unknown origin and suspicious nature. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd been using Sarah's journal, preparing the healing tonics for injured ranch hands. Word must have spread when Jake's badly sprained ankle healed in half the expected time. Furthermore, Mrs. Beaumont continued. Mr. Callahan's judgment in business matters has become erratic. His recent decision to withdraw credit from upstanding establishments while extending it to less reputable ventures. You mean? Beau interrupted, his quiet voice cutting through her rhetoric like a knife. My decision to withdraw support from businesses that discriminate against my wife and employees while expanding partnerships with those who show basic human decency. The council recognizes Mr. Callahan, Mayor Harrison said hastily, clearly unsettled by the dangerous edge in Beau's tone. Let's dispense with the theater, Beau said, rising slowly. You've all read the meeting agenda. You know what this is. Really about. He drew a document from his coat. This is a list of every outstanding loan, mortgage and water rights agreement in Ash Hollow. I own most of them. I've been a silent partner in your prosperity for 20 years. Uneasy murmurs rippled through the chamber. Clara watched the council members shift in their seats, their self-righteous certainty wavering in the face of economic reality. But silence, Beau continued, can be misinterpreted as weakness. 20 years ago, I let this town destroy someone I loved because I thought dignity meant accepting your judgment. That was a mistake I won't repeat. Mrs. Beaumont rallied. Are you threatening us, Mr. Callahan? No, Margaret. His use of her first name made her flinch. I'm remembering who I am. The ghost you feared wasn't a legend. It was a man who chose to stand aside. That ends today. Clara stood then, her voice clear in the tense chamber. The medicines I prepare come from Sarah Callahan's research. A woman of science you condemned as a witch. I've studied her methods, tested her remedies. They work. She met Mrs. Beaumont's gaze steadily. You can call me witch if you choose, but you cannot deny the healing. The council chamber erupted in whispers. Mayor Harrison banged his gavel frantically. Order! This is highly irregular. No, Clara continued, drawing strength from Beau's presence beside her. What's irregular is a town that would rather see its children suffer than accept help from someone they've decided to fear. What's irregular is calling yourself Christians while practicing persecution. She removed a small bottle from her reticule, placing it on the council table. This tonic cured Jake Martinez's ankle. The same recipe could help your son's chronic cough, Mayor Harrison. Sarah's journal is filled with such remedies. Knowledge isn't evil just because you don't understand it. Beau's voice backed her words with steel. Here's how this will proceed. The council will cease its campaign against my wife and my ranch. In return, we'll continue to support this town's growth under new terms that ensure fair treatment for all. Additionally, Clara will establish a proper dispensary, offering Sarah's medicines to any who need them. He placed a contract on the table. The choice is yours. But remember, pride is poor comfort in a harsh winter, and my water rights agreements come due for renewal very soon. The council minutes recorded what followed in dry, careful language. Motion to dismiss concerns regarding Callahan Ranch operations, passed 7-2. Motion to establish town dispensary under Mrs. Clara Callahan's supervision, passed 6-3. Motion to adjourn, unanimous. But they couldn't record the shift in power that occurred that day. The moment when fear gave way to respect, when whispers turned to thoughtful silence, when a ghost and a supposed witch joined forces to reshape a town's future. As they left the chamber, Clara caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. She and Beau, standing shoulder to shoulder, no longer victims, but architects of change. The council minutes would mark this day in simple ink, but its true impact would be written in the lives of those they could now help, in the legacy of a dream that had waited 20 years to flower. The music box's melody drifted through the library's evening quiet, its delicate notes picking out a half-forgotten waltz. Clara had discovered it while reorganizing the shelves. A small rosewood box with mother-of-pearl inlay, tucked behind. Decades of ledgers. Now it sat open on Beau's desk, its tiny dancer turning in endless circles as they sorted through Sarah's medical journals together. She bought it in Boston, Beau said, his voice soft with memory. Said every proper home needed music, even if it came from a mechanical dancer. He touched the box gently. Haven't wound it since. The waltz continued, filling the space between them with its bittersweet song. Outside, rain painted the windows with silver, creating a cocoon of warmth within the library. 2 months of shared meals, shared work, and shared purpose had worn smooth the rough edges of their arranged beginning. Clara looked up from Sarah's careful notes on willow bark tinctures to find Bo watching her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "You miss her still," she said. Not a question, not an accusation, simply truth. Differently now. His answer surprised them both. "Before you came, missing her was all I had. A ghost, clutching a ghost." He stood, moving to the window. "But you've given her work meaning again, given this house life, made me remember what it's like to—" He trailed off, but Clara heard the unspoken words hanging in the air between them. The music box played on, its tune asking a question neither of them had dared voice. "Dance with me." The words escaped her before she could reconsider. At his startled look, she added, "Sarah's medicines work better when the spirit is tended to, or so her notes say." A smile touched his lips, the rare, unguarded kind that transformed his entire face. "Do they now?" He extended his hand. "Far. And be it from me to argue with medical wisdom." Clara's heart stuttered as his fingers closed around hers. They'd touched before, helping with horses, passing documents, steadying each other through crises, but this was different. This was choice rather than necessity, want rather than need. The music box's waltz wrapped around them as Bo drew her into the proper frame. "It's been a while," he warned. "For us both," she agreed. Their first steps were awkward, two people remembering how to move together. But muscle memory took over, and soon they were turning smoothly between desk and bookshelf, the library transformed into an impromptu ballroom. "Thank you," Bo said suddenly, "for the dance, for making me feel human again." His hand was warm, against her back. "I spent so long being the ghost they feared, I almost forgot how to be anything else." Clara's fingers tightened on his shoulder. "And thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. For giving me a home when I'd forgotten what that felt like." The music box's melody began to slow, its mechanism winding down. Their steps gentled with it, until they were barely moving, simply holding each other in the lamplit quiet. Clara. Her name on his lips was different now, weighted with something new. "I know this began as convenience, as protection. But I find myself—" A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. The music box gave one final discordant note before falling silent. The spell broke, and they stepped apart, both a little unsteady. "I should wind it," Bo said quickly, reaching for the box. "If you'd like to keep dancing." Clara touched his arm, stilling him. "Bo." She waited until he met her eyes. "Some things, once wound down, can be wound up again. Others need to find their own new music." Understanding bloomed in his face. Slowly, deliberately, he closed the music box's lid. The tiny dancer disappeared, but in the quiet that followed, Clara sensed a different sort of dance beginning, one written not in notes and measures, but in shared breaths and shortened distances. "It's getting late," she said softly. "I should stay." The word was gentle, not a demand, but an offering. "Just stay a while longer. We can go through more of Sarah's notes." Clara settled back into her chair, and Bo returned to his, the space between them somehow smaller than before. The music box sat silent on the desk, its dance complete, but its work done. Like Sarah's journals, it had served its purpose. Not just carrying the past, but building a bridge to the future. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion on. The windows, nature providing its own melody for the unspoken song growing between them. The poison bottle gleamed darkly in Jake's palm, its green glass catching the afternoon light, filtering through Bo's study windows. The label, half peeled but still legible, bore the name of Mrs. Beaumont's favorite apothecary in Cheyenne. Found it while clearing out the old Wynn place, Jake explained, his weathered face grave. It was hidden under a loose floorboard in the kitchen. Along with these, he placed several letters on Beau's desk, their paper yellow with age. Clara sat very still, her hands clenched in her lap. The bottle seemed to mock her with its presence, a twist of fate that had taken one life and nearly destroyed another. "Read them," Jake urged quietly. "Mrs. Callahan needs to know the truth." Beau picked up the first letter, his voice tight as he read aloud. "Dearest Thomas, your wife's continued presence is an affront to decent society. Remember our arrangement, the money to cover your gambling debts in exchange for your help in removing this blight from our town. The enclosed powder, properly administered, will appear as heart failure." The words hit Clara like physical blows. "Thomas was working with Mrs. Beaumont?" Keep reading," Jake said grimly. The next letter revealed more. Thomas's growing paranoia, his demands for more money, his threats to expose Mrs. Beaumont's previous arrangements with other undesirables she'd driven from town. The final letter, dated the day of Thomas's death, trembled with barely contained rage. "You weak-willed fool," Beau read, his voice hardening. "You were supposed to poison her, not develop a conscience. Your sudden attack of morality will cost us both. Come to my house tonight. We'll discuss how to salvage this situation. And Thomas, bring the remaining poison." All of it. Clara's world tilted on its axis. "He was protecting me? At the end?" "Appears so," Jake said. "Talk to some folks in town. Thomas was seen heading to Beaumont's house that night, drunk and raging. But he never arrived. Had his attack. Right there in your kitchen, because he knew," Clara whispered. "Knew what she wanted him to do and couldn't live with it." A bitter laugh escaped her. "All this time, they've called me witch and murderess, while the real poisoner sat in her pew every Sunday, planning her next victim." Beau set the letters down carefully, but Clara saw the fury in his controlled movements. "Jake, get Marshal Davis from the county seat. He's no friend of Beaumont's, and find Dr. Morrison. We'll need his testimony about Thomas's death." "Already sent for them both," Jake said. "Should be here by nightfall." After Jake left, silence filled the study. Clara stared at the poison bottle, remembering Thomas's final moments, his wild eyes, his clutched chest, his last whispered words she'd never understood until now. "Won't do it. Won't kill her. I should have known," she said finally. "Should have seen through Mrs. Beaumont's pretense of Christian charity. All those others she drove away. How many died mysterious deaths? How many lives did she destroy in the name of moral purity?" Beau moved around the desk, kneeling beside her chair. "You saw what she wanted everyone to see. The respected widow, the moral guardian. Even I believed her act until—" He stopped, something dark crossing his face. "Sarah used to visit her, you know, brought her medicines for her headaches. I always wondered if—" Clara caught his hand. "We'll never know for certain, but we can stop her now, make sure she never harms another soul." "You could leave," Beau said quietly. "Once she's arrested, your name will be cleared. You'd be free to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere without these shadows." Clara turned to him, seeing the fear beneath his controlled expression. Fear not of losing his protective role, but of losing her. "My place is here," she said firmly. "With the dispensary, with Sarah's work, with you." The poison bottle caught the light again, its green glass reminiscent of snake scales. Such a small thing, to hold so much evil, to carry so much power to destroy lives and birth lies. But its discovery had brought truth to light at last, had transformed victim to victor. "Together then," Beau said, echoing their words from the library, but weighted now with deeper meaning. "Together," Clara agreed. She stood, squaring her shoulders. "Let's finish this." As they waited for the marshal, Clara watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Soon, Mrs. Beaumont's carefully constructed world would crumble. Her true nature exposed to the town she'd terrorized for so long. The poison bottle would stand as evidence of her crimes, proof that evil often wore a respectable face, and that truth, like a healing tonic, sometimes tasted bitter before it cured. Thomas's final act of defiance had taken years to bear fruit, but its harvest would be justice, not just for Clara, but for every soul Mrs. Beaumont had marked for destruction in her quest to play God in a frontier town. Beau's rifle hung above the study fireplace, its polished stock reflecting lamplight, as Marshal Davis examined the evidence spread across the desk. Outside, a crowd had gathered, drawn by the sight of the lawman's horse at the Callahan ranch. Mrs. Beaumont sat rigid in a straight-backed chair, her composure cracking only when her eyes fell on the poison bottle. Quite a cache of letters you kept, Margaret," Marshal Davis said, his weathered face grim. "Detailed records of every person you've driven out of Ash Hollow, every arrangement you made. Did your conscience demand such careful bookkeeping?" "This is absurd," Mrs. Beaumont snapped, but her fingers worried the cross at her throat. "I am a pillar of this community. These accusations are clearly another of Clara Wynn's witch." "Mrs. Callahan," Beau cut in, his voice carrying the edge of a storm. "My wife's name is Mrs. Callahan." The marshal held up one of the letters. "Your writing, your seal, your signature. And here's the receipt from the apothecary in Cheyenne. Funny thing about poison, sellers keep records. The apothecary remembered. Says you were quite specific about wanting something that would mimic heart failure." Clara stood by the window, watching darkness gather beyond the glass. How many nights had she lain awake, haunted by Thomas's death, carrying the weight of the town's judgment? Now, in the study's lamplight, truth was finally having its say. "Thomas Wynn was a drunk and a gambler," Mrs. Beaumont said, switching. "Tactics. He came to me for help. I merely tried to guide him toward righteousness by giving him poison to murder his wife." Dr. Morrison spoke from his corner. "I've reviewed my notes from that night. The symptoms I attributed to heart failure, they match exactly with this particular poison, except Thomas took it himself, didn't he, rather than use it on Clara." Mrs. Beaumont's face twisted. He was weak, couldn't see that removing her was God's work. These outsiders, these women who don't know their place, they poison our society with their independent thoughts, their mysterious medicines, their refusal to submit. "Like Sarah Callahan?" Clara's quiet question cut through the room like a blade. The older woman's eyes narrowed. "Sarah Callahan was a heretic who thought science could replace God's will. She came to me, too, with her tonics and tinctures, trying to corrupt our women with ideas above their station. The fever was divine judgment. The fever," Beau's voice was dangerous now, "or something you put in her tea during those charitable visits?" Marshal Davis leaned forward. "Mrs. Beaumont, I've got letters spanning 20 years. How many deaths have you arranged in the name of God's will?" "Everything I did was for this town's moral welfare." She stood, righteous fury overwhelming caution. "Someone had to protect our values, our way of life. These women with their herbs and books, thinking they know better than God's ordained order. And so you appointed yourself God's executioner," Clara said, moving away from the window. "You didn't poison with just bottles, did you? You poisoned with whispers, with lies, with carefully crafted rumors. You killed Sarah with isolation before you ever touched her tea. You tried to do the same to me. You should have died." Mrs. Beaumont's composure shattered completely. "Thomas promised you would drink the tonic that night, but he turned coward, threatened to expose everything, said he'd found his conscience." She laughed bitterly. "He drank it himself instead. Poetic justice, wouldn't you say? The would-be murderer taking his own poison?" The confession hung in the air like smoke. Marshal Davis nodded to his deputies waiting outside. "Margaret Beaumont, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Wynn, conspiracy to commit murder, and God knows what else we'll find once we start digging." As they led her out, she turned back, her face a mask of contempt. "You think this changes? Anything? This town will never accept you, Clara Wynne. You'll always be the witch, the outsider. No, Bo said, moving to Clara's side. She's the healer you tried to destroy, the strength you couldn't break. And unlike you, Margaret, she actually does God's work, mending what people like you have broken. The crowd outside parted as Mrs. Beaumont was led to the marshal's wagon. Clara watched from the study window as the town's moral guardian was taken away in chains, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling to dust. The rifle above the fireplace caught the last rays of sunset, its metal gleaming like justice. Finally served. Clara felt Beau's hand find hers, solid and warm in the gathering dark. They had stood their ground together, faced down the poison of lies with the power of truth. "It's over," she whispered. "No," Beau said softly. "It's just beginning. Beyond." The window, the first stars emerged, bright as hope in a clearing sky. Beau's rifle hung above the study fireplace, its polished stock reflecting lamplight, as Marshal Davis examined the evidence spread across the desk. Outside, a crowd had gathered, drawn by the sight of the lawman's horse at the Callahan ranch. Mrs. Beaumont sat rigid in a straight-backed chair, her composure cracking only when her eyes fell on the poison bottle. "Quite a cache of letters you kept, Margaret," Marshal Davis said, his weathered face grim. "Detailed records of every person you've driven out of Ash Hollow, every arrangement you made. Did your conscience demand such careful bookkeeping?" "This is absurd," Mrs. Beaumont snapped, but her fingers worried the cross at her throat. "I am a pillar of this community. These accusations are clearly another of Clara Wynne's witch, Mrs. Callahan," Beau cut in, his voice carrying the edge of a storm. "My wife's name is Mrs. Callahan." The marshal held up one of the letters. "Your writing, your seal, your signature, and here's the receipt from the apothecary in Cheyenne. Funny thing about poison. Sellers keep records." The apothecary remembered. "You well. Says you were quite specific about wanting something that would mimic heart failure." Clara stood by the window, watching darkness gather beyond the glass. How many nights had she lain awake, haunted by Thomas's death, carrying the weight of the town's judgment? Now, in the study's lamplight, truth was finally having its say. "Thomas Wynne was a drunk and a gambler," Mrs. Beaumont said, switching. "Tactics. He came to me for help. I merely tried to guide him toward righteousness by giving him poison to murder his wife." Dr. Morrison spoke from his corner. "I've reviewed my notes from that night. The symptoms I attributed to heart failure, they match exactly with this particular poison, except Thomas took it himself, didn't he? Rather than use it on Clara." Mrs. Beaumont's face twisted. He was weak, couldn't see that removing her was God's work. These outsiders, these women who don't know their place, they poison our society with their independent thoughts, their mysterious medicines, their refusal to submit. Like Sarah Callahan? Clara's quiet question cut through the room like a blade. The older woman's eyes narrowed. Sarah Callahan was a heretic who thought science could replace God's will. She came to me too, with her tonics and tinctures, trying to corrupt our women with ideas above their station. The fever was divine judgment. The fever, Beau's voice was dangerous now, or something you put in her tea during those charitable visits? Marshal Davis leaned forward. "Mrs. Beaumont, I've got letters spanning 20 years. How many deaths have you arranged in the name of God's will?" "Everything I did was for this town's moral welfare." She stood, righteous fury overwhelming caution. "Someone had to protect our values, our way of life. These women with their herbs and books, thinking they know better than God's ordained order. And so you appointed yourself God's executioner," Clara said, moving away from the window. "You didn't poison with just bottles, did you? You poisoned with whispers, with lies, with carefully crafted rumors. You killed Sarah with isolation before you ever touched her tea. You tried to do the same to me. You should have died." Mrs. Beaumont's composure shattered completely. "Thomas promised you would drink the tonic that night, but he turned coward, threatened to expose everything, said he'd found his conscience." She laughed bitterly. He drank it himself instead. Poetic justice, wouldn't you say? The would-be murderer taking his own poison, the confession hung in the air like smoke. Marshal Davis nodded to his deputies waiting outside. Margaret Beaumont, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Wynne, conspiracy to commit murder, and God knows what else we'll find once we start digging. As they led her out, she turned back, her face a mask of contempt. You think this changes anything? This town will never accept you, Clara Wynne. You'll always be the witch, the outsider. No, Beau said, moving to Clara's side. She's the healer you tried to destroy, the strength you couldn't break. And unlike you, Margaret, she actually does God's work, mending what people like you have broken. The crowd outside parted as Mrs. Beaumont was led to the marshal's wagon. Clara watched from the study window as the town's moral guardian was taken away in chains, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling to dust. The rifle above the fireplace caught the last rays of sunset, its metal gleaming like justice. Finally served. Clara felt Beau's hand find hers, solid and warm in the gathering dark. They had stood their ground together, faced down the poison of lies with the power of truth. It's over, she whispered. No, Beau said softly. It's just beginning, beyond. The window, the first stars emerged, bright as hope in a clearing sky. The judge's gavel sat heavy on his bench, its polished oak bearing witness to countless verdicts. Today, it would speak for the dead, for the accused, for 20 years of crimes hidden behind respectability's mask. The county courthouse hummed. With tension, as Mrs. Beaumont stood before justice, her black dress a mockery of mourning. Clara sat in the front row beside Beau, their fingers intertwined. The past week had revealed the full scope of Margaret Beaumont's crimes, not just Thomas's. Death and the plot against Clara, but a string of suspicious deaths and disappearances stretching back 2 decades. Each victim had somehow offended her sense of moral order, each elimination justified in her twisted interpretation of divine will. All rise, the bailiff called, and Judge Harrison took his seat. Unlike his brother the mayor, the judge was known for his unflinching pursuit of truth. Margaret Beaumont, he began, his voice filling the crowded courtroom, this court has heard testimony that paints a picture of systematic terrorism masked as moral authority. We've heard from families torn apart by your accusations, from witnesses, to your manipulation, from experts about the poison found in your possession. Mrs. Beaumont stood rigid, her face a mask of righteous indignation. I acted only to protect. Silence. The gavel cracked once. You've had your say. Now justice will have its turn. Clara felt Beau's hand tighten on hers as Dr. Morrison approached the bench, carrying Sarah's journal. Over the past week, the doctor had studied its contents extensively, comparing Sarah's documented remedies with the symptoms of those who had died under Mrs. Beaumont's spiritual guidance. Your Honor, the doctor said, Sarah Callahan's medical notes show she was treating several patients for symptoms consistent with slow poisoning. She was close to identifying the source when she herself fell ill. He placed the journal before the judge. The pattern is clear. When Mrs. Beaumont's whisper campaigns failed to drive someone away, she escalated to more permanent solutions. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Clara saw faces in the crowd she recognized, people who had shunned her, who had believed the lies. Now they looked at Mrs. Beaumont with dawning horror, seeing the monster beneath the pious exterior. Furthermore, Marshal Davis added, producing the stack of letters found at the ranch, we have Mrs. Beaumont's own words documenting her methods. Thomas Wynne wasn't her first attempt at manipulating someone into murder. He was just the first to choose death over becoming her instrument. The judge examined the evidence carefully, his face grave. Mrs. Beaumont, this court finds you guilty of the murder of Thomas Wynne, conspiracy to commit murder against Clara Callahan, and given the evidence of your other crimes, I'm binding you over for grand jury investigation into at least 7 additional deaths. The gavel fell with devastating finality. You will spend the remainder of your days in the territorial prison, where perhaps you'll learn the difference between God's justice and your own cruel manipulations. As the bailiff led Mrs. Beaumont away, she turned to face the crowd. I was right about them all. The outsiders, the progressives, the ones who'd change our way of life. Look at her, she jabbed a finger at Clara, practicing her herb witchcraft openly now, corrupting our town with her foreign ideas. No, Margaret, Clara stood, her voice carrying clearly. I practice medicine, documented and proven. I heal rather than harm. And I forgive you, not for your sake, but for all those you wounded with your poison of hatred. They deserve to see justice served with mercy, to know that light can overcome even the darkest evil. The gavel cracked one final. And time as Mrs. Beaumont was led away, her accusations fading down the corridor. In her wake, the courtroom sat silent, absorbing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Judge Harrison turned to Clara. Mrs. Callahan, this court offers its deepest apologies for the persecution you've endured. Your late husband's estate will be restored to you, though I understand you've found a far better home. He smiled slightly at Beau. Furthermore, the territory would be grateful if you'd consider establishing a proper medical practice, using Sarah Callahan's research. We need more healers on the frontier. Clara felt Beau's proud smile as she answered, Thank you, Your Honor. I'd be honored to continue Sarah's work. The gavel that had sealed Mrs. Beaumont's fate now recorded Clara's vindication, its solid weight, representing the triumph of truth over lies, of healing over harm. As they left the courthouse, Clara saw the town with new eyes. The shadows of suspicion had lifted, replaced by the first fragile shoots of understanding. Ready to go home? Beau asked softly. Home. Not just a sanctuary now, but a place to build their future together. Clara smiled up at him. Yes, we have a garden to tend. The sunrise painting hung in Clara's new dispensary, its colors catching the morning light, just as they had in Sarah's journal sketches. She'd found the unfinished canvas in the ranch's attic, Sarah's last work, a dawn sky over the prairie, waiting 20 years to be completed. Now it watched over a room that would have made its creator proud. More mullein tea, Mrs. Callahan? Young Jenny Miller clutched her throat, voice still raspy. The same girl who had once hidden from the witch now sat trustingly on Clara's examination table, legs swinging as Clara checked her breathing. And honey, Clara smiled, mixing the remedy, your mother's doing better with the willow bark tincture. Says she hasn't had a headache in weeks. Pa can't believe how much work she's getting done. Jenny paused. He wanted me to say sorry about believing. She trailed off, embarrassed. The past is past, Clara said gently, providing the cup. What matters is the healing now. The dispensary had transformed the old Wynn house into something new, a place of hope rather than shadows. Townfolk who had once crossed the street to avoid Clara now sought her help openly. Sarah's journals lined the shelves, their wisdom finally serving its intended purpose. The bell over the door chimed as Beau entered, bringing the scent of sage and leather with him. His daily visits had become a ritual, love wrapped in the excuse of delivering supplies. Ladies, he nodded, eyes warming as they met Clara's. Jenny giggled, already noting the change in the room's atmosphere. Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Callahan. Ma says to expect her tomorrow for more of that joint liniment. After she left, Beau crossed to Clara, drawing her into a gentle embrace. Busy morning, 4 patients already. Mrs. Peterson's baby fever broke, thanks to Sarah's feverfew compound, and Reverend White actually quoted scripture about healing herbs in his sermon yesterday. She laughed softly. Times do change. You changed them, he murmured into her hair. You and Sarah both. Healing more than bodies here, healing the town's soul too. Clara turned in his arms to face the painting. I've been thinking about finishing it. The sunrise. Sarah's last vision of hope for this place. She touched the canvas gently. She knew, didn't she? What was coming. That's why she documented everything so carefully, saved all her knowledge. She believed in healing, in progress. Like you. Bo's voice roughened. Sometimes I think she led me to you in her way, left all the pieces for the right person to find. Through the dispensary windows, they could see Ash Hollow stirring to life. Where once there had been whispers and sidelong glances, now there were waves, greetings, the normal commerce of a town learning to face its shadows and grow beyond them. Tuck. Painting caught the real sunrise's light, making the unfinished sky seem to glow. Clara had been adding to it bit by bit, following Sarah's sketch, but adding her own touches. Prairie flowers in the foreground, wild horses in the distance, the suggestion of the ranch's silhouette on the horizon. "I'd like to hang it in the ranch house when it's done," she said, "in our room." The words still felt new, sweet on her tongue. They'd moved Clara's things to the master bedroom last week, their love finally claiming its proper place. "Our room," Bo echoed, smile in his voice. "Still getting used to that, to being fully alive again, not just haunting my own house." "Speaking of the house," Clara turned to face him fully, "Mrs. Hayes mentioned something this morning about needing to air out the nursery soon." Bo went very still. "The nursery?" Clara took his hand, placing it over her stomach. "Sarah's journals had excellent advice about early pregnancy symptoms and ways to be sure." Joy broke across his face like another sunrise, years of grief and loneliness burning away in its light. He pulled her close, careful even in his excitement. "A baby? You're certain?" 3 months by my calculations. She touched his cheek. "New life, new beginnings." Sarah would have liked that too, I think. He kissed her then, tender and fierce at once. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes. Through the windows, the morning had bloomed fully, painting the dispensary in shades of promise. The sunrise in the painting seemed to shimmer, art and reality merging in a moment of pure possibility. "I need to finish my rounds," Clara said, softly. "More healing to do. I'll come back at lunch," Bo promised. "We'll tell Mrs. Hayes together. She'll want to start planning immediately." They shared one more kiss before he left, the dispensary bell chiming his departure. Clara turned back to her work, joy humming in her veins. The painting watched over her as she prepared the day's medicines, its unfinished sky now a symbol not of truncated hope, but of endless possibility. Sarah's legacy, Clara's love, and new life growing beneath her heart, all coming together in a dawn that had waited 20 years to break. The matching wedding bands caught the autumn sunlight, their new engraving still bright against the gold, from ghost to glory, in Bo's strong script. 1 year to the day since their first hasty ceremony in the sheriff's office, but this time the entire town had gathered to witness their true wedding, their chosen joining. Clara stood before the mirror in Sarah's old dressing room, now her own, smoothing the ivory silk of her gown over her growing belly. The bands had been Sarah's final gift, found in a letter dated just before her death, for the one who will heal his heart when the time is right. Even then, she had been planning for a future she wouldn't see. "Ready, Mrs. Callahan?" Mrs. Hayes appeared in the doorway, her iron-grey hair softened by emotion. In her arms, she carried something wrapped in tissue paper. "Though I suppose you'll be Mrs. Callahan twice over after today." "What's that?" Clara asked, watching in the mirror as the housekeeper approached. "Found it in the attic, with Sarah's things." Mrs. Hayes carefully unwrapped a delicate circlet of dried herbs and tiny white flowers. "She made it for her own wedding. Wrote here that it should be saved for the next healing heart to grace these halls." She placed it gently on Clara's dark hair, the preserved bloom still fragrant after 2 decades. Some things wait for the right moment to bloom again. Through the window, Clara could see the garden, where she now tended both Sarah's medicinal herbs and her own flowering hopes. The dispensary had grown into a proper clinic, with Dr. Morrison himself referring patients. The town's children no longer whispered witch, but healer, coming to her with their scrapes and fears, leaving with cookies and comfort. A soft kick beneath her ribs made her smile. Sarah Grace. They'd already decided if it was a girl, Thomas. Wait for a boy, reclaiming the name from its darker history, honoring the man who'd found his conscience at the end. Bows pacing a groove in the study floor. Jake's voice came from the hall, warm with amusement. Think we ought to put him out of his misery? Clara touched the herb crown, feeling the connection to another bride who had stood in this room, full of dreams for a future cut too short. Yes, she said softly, it's time. The ceremony would be held in the garden, autumn roses twining with healing herbs, beauty and purpose growing together as they should. As Clara descended the stairs on Jake's arm, she saw the gathered crowd through new eyes, not persecutors turned friends, but simply people, capable of both cruelty and kindness, of growth and change. But it was Bo who drew her gaze and held. He stood beneath an arch of roses, the ghost rider transformed by love into flesh and blood and joy. When their eyes met, the years of pain and loneliness fell away like shadows at dawn. Reverend White spoke of redemption, of love's power to heal not just hearts, but communities. Clara barely heard him, lost in Bo's eyes as they exchanged the rings that had waited so long to be worn. When he kissed her, she tasted the future on his lips, sweet as hope, strong as truth, endless as the prairie sky above them. The celebration spread from garden to house. Townspeople who had once shunned her now raising toasts to her happiness. Dr. Morrison danced with Mrs. Hayes, Jake flirted with the school teacher, and children played tag between the herb beds, their laughter a different kind of healings. Evening painted the sky in Sarah's sunrise colors. Bo led Clara away from the crowd to the quiet of their study. The wedding bands gleamed in the lamplight as he drew her close. Happy, Mrs. Callahan? His voice held the smile that was no longer rare. Happiness seems too small a word, she answered, feeling their child move between them. We're writing a new story here, aren't we? Not just for us, but for all of them. Too. Through the window they could see the town lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. Soon the guests would leave, carrying home medicines and memories, stories of how love had transformed not just two wounded souls, but an entire community's heart. Sarah knew, Bo said softly, touching the herb crown still gracing Clara's hair. She knew love would find its way back here, that healing would come full circle. And Thomas found his redemption too, Clara added, choosing conscience over cruelty at the end. The wedding bands caught the light again, as their hands entwined, the engravings telling their story in miniature, from ghost to glory, from persecution to peace, from broken to blessed. Outside, the stars emerged above their garden of healing, herbs and blooming roses, witnessed by a town that had learned to see with new eyes. Love had done what hate could not, transformed victim to healer, ghost to husband, suspicion to trust. The matching rings would bear witness to this truth, passed down through generations yet to come, telling of the autumn day when a ghost rider and a supposed witch showed an entire town how to bloom again in love's healing light.